and welcome back to the show. Today we are talking with Vicky McKim about the evolution of vendor management. Vicky, you mentioned KPIs, key performance indicators.
Yeah.
You mentioned some KPIs at the end of our last segment. Can you expand on that a little bit? What kind of things would we really look at for different vendors? And would they be different leading into the next part for small companies, medium companies, or large companies that we want to partner with?
Sure. So when I talk about key performance indicators, it really varies across the type of vendor that you have. So let me give you an example for IT. So maybe you're outsourcing your email, and maybe that email vendor has a major disruption once a month and your email is not available one time a month, or maybe you're outsourcing your voice system to a provider and maybe they're not available once a month. So when you're looking at those things, for those where you're relying specifically on their services and then they don't perform in a way that you need them to perform, that indicates that that's a high-risk vendor, right? Mm-hmm. So it could be that for, if you're talking about technology. Let's talk about facilities, though. So I had the example of that subcontractor, and let me give you another example. So I had a facility company. We were leasing some space. This was a different office, and their maintenance engineer had a clog in a pipe, and it was very stubborn, and he decided to use a new product, and he didn't thoroughly read the label, and he poured the product into the pipe. Well, about half an hour later, we had a hole through our ceiling that melted, and I use that word melted. It was curdled around the edge of the ceiling tile. It looked ruffled. It had eaten a hole in the desktop, and it was eating through the next concrete floor. And people were complaining that their eyes were burning. And this is in a high-rise office building, right? So that vendor, their maintenance engineer, that facilities engineer, had not read the product label. We had been assured it was a green building. This was not a green product. It was sulfuric acid. And it had literally eaten a hole all the way down through one floor and was eating into the next floor. And we were forced to evacuate a large call center operation off of that floor, and we were out for 24 hours. And so anybody who has call center operations, they know that that's a big deal when you have to shut down a whole operation with, 200 seats in your call center. That impacts your revenue. And so from a facilities perspective, there's all kinds of things that your building manager, if you're leasing space, can cause disruption for, and so you want to look at that. Now, your business unit vendors, depending on what services you're buying from them, whether those are, what about a call center? We just talked about that. So if you're a business unit and you're outsourcing some of your contact center operations, you want to make sure that they're always on and that your phones are always being answered and that your clients are being well taken care of if you're outsourcing that. So that's kind of the aspects of managing vendors differently. When you look at small companies versus large companies, mostly the large companies, they have a very robust risk management program. When it comes down to the small companies, that's where it's harder for them to manage that. They don't have the in-house expertise. And I will tell you, I've gone to my insurance companies and I've said, okay, this is how I do vendor management. This is how I do risk management. And tell me what I'm missing. And these are loss control agents. These are, people who deal with risk every single day. And they've told me, we don't do anything that you do. And then I have questions back as to, okay, but then how do you prevent these kinds of things? And I give them all these concrete examples, and they say, we don't prevent them. We don't even look for those. We just end up paying those claims. So if you have a robust risk management program, you're going to catch a lot of these things that can cause these one-off disruptions that are just absolutely ridiculous. When you're a small company, you're probably going to have to rely on those loss control agents. But one thing you can do is you can ask questions of your vendors ahead of time, just making sure that they have a robust business continuity program. And if they don't, and if you choose to use them, then always make sure that you have a backup vendor that you can go to for that source and can activate that really quickly.
And using your example, make sure they're trained to know how to use their products.
Exactly.
With that example, the sulfuric acid, just out of curiosity, nobody got hurt, correct? Because that would you mentioned it went through a desk and everything, and that's got to be really dangerous.
Yeah, it was. And fortunately, it was on a corner of the floor where no one was actively sitting, and it was the building manager that told me her eyes were burning. She sent me a photo. I told her immediately, get everybody with asthma and anybody who's pregnant out of there, like right now. So we sent those off to the downstairs lobby, which we were several floors above, and so we got them out first. And then she opened the doors, and we called for more fresh air return in the suite, and then we found out what it was, and we just shut the thing down because hazmat had to come in and clean it up.
Wow. Well, thank goodness no one got hurt. Now, with the...
that's very good.
Yeah. With the, you mentioned a few times now, and I want to touch on it, making sure they have a business continuity plan. Can you expand a little bit on that? How does business continuity management get involved with vendor management, and what kind of things do we expect to see in a potential vendor's program themselves, if they are even willing to tell us what they do?
Yeah, and so one of the things you want to be asking is, if they're relying on any technology at all, you want to be asking about their disaster recovery plan, right? If they're, you want to be asking them, okay, if you lose this particular facility, I know this is your headquarters, what's your backup plan for that? How, have you tested to make sure all of your employees can work from home if that's your strategy? And just validating those things that you do yourself for business continuity, making sure that they're doing the same kinds of activities. Have they trained their employees? Do they exercise? How often do they update their plans? How often do they notify employees and test their call trees if they're doing that? Either test that notification system or their call trees to make sure everything's in place. And so those are things that you just, very simply can ask them, even if you don't have a formalized vendor management program.
How do you kind of validate some of those responses? If you're asking, let's say five vendors through an RFP for all this information, validate you do a lot of the things that you just mentioned. How do you validate that what you're getting back is correct or sounds correct? Or, how do you identify, if, something seems suspect?
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons that I'll ask for documentation. If they're like ISO compliant and I can see that certificate of compliance, that makes a huge difference to me. If they're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant for a technology company, that makes a big difference because that's been independently vetted. Now, on your maybe facilities or some of the business services that you have, even if they won't give you the details of their plan, what I would suggest then is that you have a viewing of their plan as you would in an audit. Let me just come into your office or you come to mine, bring your stuff. Just walk me through it. Let me see what you've got. I'm pretty quick that I can take a look at someone's plan and do a, quick review, and I'm looking for specific components and then looking for their testing documentation. If they can provide that to me, I at least know at that point that they actually do have a plan. Even if I don't know all of the details, I can see that they're trying to actively manage it. And if they're actively trying to manage that program and train their employees, that's going to reduce my risk. Even if it's not exactly perfect, it's still going to reduce the risk.
That's interesting. I've seen a lot of companies, shall we say, or potential vendors, they don't want to share anything. If someone doesn't want to share any information with you, do you just kind of push them away, or is there a different way of obtaining information? Any suggestions there?
I think that's where you have to balance, are they, how critical are they to your operations? So again, if you're going to be outsourcing maybe your call center to someone, obviously that's going to be critically important for your clients. So if they're unwilling to share any information at all, not even allow you to see what their plans are, just as a review, not taking anything with you, not retaining any records, but just even looking at how you manage the program, then at that point, I would say if they're unwilling to share, they're probably not a vendor that you want to rely on 100%. If it's a service like I talked about, your vending, for maybe your pop machine or your coffee, that's a different kind of risk. And, the questions that you ask them would be very, very different than what you would ask like somebody providing technology or some other kind of service for your organization.
So do you really need to, or I guess you really need to take into consideration what it is you're asking from this vendor, what part and impact they could have on your company, your facilities by, what they do, and that's going to drive what you ask. Yeah.
And that, part of that is just rating that vendor. What's the risk to your organization? Is it a high risk, a medium risk, a low risk? Where's your risk tolerance level for that? And sometimes, when you've been embedded with a particular vendor and maybe suddenly their performance goes down, how do you manage that? Sometimes it's not easy to move from one vendor to another, and it can be really, really challenging.
Well, I'm going to go off script. How do you manage that? Because I know we weren't going to talk about something like that, but you just brought up a great point, and I think, wow, how do you do that? Because I think just about all of us have gone through that on some point. If you've got a vendor who isn't meeting your expectations, how do you go about changing things with keeping that impact low?
Yeah, and so you have to have some of this involves some long-term planning. So if I have a vendor that's providing a service to me and it's going along fine, and then suddenly over the last year or 18 months, they've had a number of issues that have directly affected my ability to deliver services to my clients, and it's starting to impact my revenue. At that point, I have to decide how much risk am I willing? How willing is this vendor to correct the problems? Can they correct the problems? If I don't see a change within X number of months, this is really a methodical thing. You've got 3 months to change this. If you do not change this, if we have one more outage, you need to understand that we're going to have to choose, and it's not a threatening thing. It's just you have to make business decisions. And so if a vendor is unreliable, sometimes depending on, if this is a system change or a platform change, these changes could take literally a year or more to transition to a different vendor. And so some of those things are really a long cycle. You think about if you've been leasing a facility and your lease is up in 5 years, well, you've had a number of problems. Say it's a roof leak and it's repeated and they've replaced the roof and you've still had water problems, or repaired the roof and they're not willing to fix it. And down the road it's going to do it again. Then at that point in 5 years when your lease is up, or is there something in your contract where you can get out of your lease? Do you want to move? But then there's a lot of expense that goes with that. And so you have to weigh what's going to be the most feasible for my company. Those are just kind of those general risk management that you go through in any business. And so your risk management department, it should be overseeing not only your business recovery, because from my perspective, after you get rid of all of the risk and mitigate everything you can, including your vendor risk, whatever you can't get rid of, that's what your business continuity planning and your DR planning is for. And so it's really one of those things that just sits up under that entire risk management program. So if you have a robust risk management program, it's going to include all of these components in it, including that vendor management.
And I think that's a perfect spot to end our second segment. We're talking today with Vicky McKim, and we're talking about vendor management. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.